Alright, hello class and professor. This is our group, Russian-American Relations. That's Donald and Vladimir Putin, and our group is me, Victor, Joseph Piltz. Go ahead. Alright, there's a video, professor, but the internet's not working, as you've already been told and probably know from other people, so it's about 2.5 minutes. You'll see it in class. The video explains, because it needs to kind of give an explanation of the key figures. Hillary Clinton, Democratic nominee for president in 2016, Donald Trump, Republican nominee, Vladimir Putin, he's the president of Russia currently, and Paul Manafort is Donald Trump's old campaign manager throughout 2016. And in this page we have Donald Trump Jr., and her name is Natalia Velenskaya, and she's a Russian lawyer who will also be explained a little more in that video. And we have James Comey, who was the director of the FBI in 2016 and 17. He was fired by President Trump. And Robert Mueller is currently the special counsel who's investigating the ties between this Russian lawyer, Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, that's also President Trump's daughter, and her husband. They all work in the White House currently. His children do, and so again, the video will explain more, and I'll be happy to get into more details in class when we talk. Our guiding question and thesis. Guiding question, why did Russia intervene in the 2016 election? Thesis, we believe that Russia interfered because the United States poses a threat to Vladimir Putin's goal of basically taking over the world politically, geographically, economically, and the US is a government by the people and for the people, and he does not want that. He wants his power. So our first section is between the American Revolutionary War and the Civil War. But first, for the rest of the class who may not know some back history, these are the original 13 colonies that existed. Great Britain, the United Kingdom, they were the ones who had settlers come over to establish these 13 colonies. And also for the class, the Russian Empire is this brown blob. 13 colonies, this teeny little red sliver over here. And so you can go ahead and click on the next one. The way we tied it into modern transformation, this is a picture of George Washington with some soldiers crossing the Delaware River, and the blue coats and the red coats, so basically the Americans and the British. And what's important about our modern transformation and with the American and Russian relationship is that back in the 1700s, Russia was fighting its main enemy, the United Kingdom, and also France, its two biggest rivals on the world stage. Those are the two most powerful nations. And when the Revolutionary War began, Russia saw this as a good opportunity to not only spite the United Kingdom, but also put France behind as well, and help itself, because if the original 13 colonies were successful in their war efforts, then, I mean, good for them. They have an alliance, they have good economic ties, they have good political power, and that was their motivation. Despite this, they did not actually formally express their support for the war, but both countries sent diplomats to each other, they sent warships, they sent supplies, and lots of other, again, non-formal gestures that showed that they were approving of their success. So go ahead. And again, the Civil War Alliance, we'll get a little more explanation in class, but this is the biggest event that we had to explain this relationship. This painting is depicting in 1863. The Russian Empire sent about 500 ships into New York's harbor, and they stationed them along the East Coast and into the Confederacy. Just during the Civil War, the United States split into two, and you had the southern states fighting for slavery, the Confederacy, and you had the Union, or the northern states, and Russia, again, did not want the northern states to be trampled over because they saw this as a good advantage to their own success, and not only for them, but to suppress the United Kingdom and suppress France. And so they stayed stationed on the United States waters for about 7 months till the end of the Civil War. So they really wanted them to win, and they did. So that's a good way to start the relationship, and it lasted for several more decades.
All right, hello people, I'm Victor. I'm going to be covering from 1865 to 1950. So in the whole time span, one of the big things that happened around the world was World War I, which happened between 1914 and 1918. It all really started when Franz Ferdinand was assassinated on June 28th, 1914. And then during that time period in World War I, the U.S., at the beginning of the war, the U.S. wasn't really I would say, didn't want to get involved, but they did have a side on who they wanted to go against. They just didn't want to fight another country's fight for another country, if that makes any sense. So the U.S. eventually got involved in 1917 from all the way to the end of the war. So the U.S. joined allies with Britain, France, Russia, Italy, and Japan, who were at war with the Central Powers, which was Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Turkey. And then after that, Germany's submarines began sinking unarmed ships. The U.S. didn't really like that, so the U.S. declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917. Again, the submarine warfare reached the peak in the northern Atlantic Ocean, so it got pretty close. And then understanding the past, so during the time in Russia, when the U.S. declared war and just everything was happening, the Marxist faction called the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia. They were led by Vladimir Lenin, so they took over on November 7th, 1917, after a brutal civil war. The Bolsheviks established that established themselves and they created the Union of Soviet Solicit Republic, which is better known as the USSR. It was the first communist government in the world. The Soviets intended to export communism to other great industrial nations, and this made them outcasts or outliers of the capitalists, which are on the completely different side of the spectrum. And then after World War One, kind of led into World War Two. On September 1st, 1931, Germany invaded Poland, Denmark, basically all other European countries. Italy, on June 10th, 1940, Italy joins the war on the side of Germany, and they declared war on Britain, the UK, France, and all the fighting spread to Greece and northern Africa. So it got pretty wild. On December 7th, 1941, we all know this day, especially in Hawaii. It is the day Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, destroying more than half of the fleets of aircraft and damaging all 8 battleships. Japan also attacked the Clark and Iba airfields in the Philippines, destroying over half of the U.S.'s Army aircrafts there as well. On June 6, 1944, D-Day is which Allied forces on 5 different beaches came in, just started to get war, and the landing included over 5,000 ships, 11,000 airplanes, and over 1,500 servicemen. August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb used in warfare, nicknamed Little Boy, was dropped in Japan in the city of Hiroshima, killing up to 140,000 people. And then on August 9th, 1945, after getting no response from Japan and the Japanese government after the Hiroshima bombing, the second atomic bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki, killing over 800,000 people. And then during the time period, the U.S. from the beginning was at war with everyone I just mentioned, but on a particular date, on December 8th, 1941, Roosevelt delivers a date which will live in infamy speech to Congress, and the U.S. declared war on Japan the day after Pearl Harbor. But at the same time, Japan was invading Hong Kong, Guam, the Lake Islands, Singapore, and the British Malaysia. And then towards the same time, the Soviets bore the brunt of World War II in Europe. They eventually triumphed over everyone, and all the glory, and just the USSR got so much power out of it. And then towards the end of the war, Moscow was established as a friendly communist regime throughout the Eastern Europe, creating the Winston Churchill called the Iron Curtain, as the Cold War with the West decreased or settled down. And then, yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Piltz, and this is my part. I'm going to be talking about which was from 1950 to 1991, the Cold War between the U.S. and Russia. So we begin in March 5th, 1953, during the death of Joseph Stalin. So after Lenin, Stalin took over, and his ideals of a communist power to rule over his country and also into other countries around the world. So after he died at the age of 74, he was succeeded by Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev also rose to power with his communist causes and ideals. So it created tensions between the U.S. and Russia. What was or began as a peaceful coexistence turned into a fight during the Cold War between the two superpowers for domination or competitive political ideals and causes. And in October 15th, 1964, Nikita Khrushchev was removed from office, and he was replaced by Leonid Brezhnev. The space race, another event in our history between the U.S. and Russia. Both countries were racing to see who would make it to space first. There were many attempts by both countries, many failed attempts by both countries. In November 1st, 1957, the Russians were the first ones to break through and actually send a dog in a spaceship called Sputnik 2, and he was the first living creature to go out of space from Earth. In 1960, talks, the Paris East and West talks between Russia and the U.S. The Russians shot down a U-2 spy plane over Russian airspace, and this was a U.S. plane that sort of decided the fate between Germany. And in April 12th, 1961, a Russian cosmonaut, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, became the first human to make it to space. So this was like one of the final times during the space race where Russia was the first to make it to space. And this was something that really motivated the US to get to the moon. Also, during this time, there were worries from both countries that if either country was able to send a spaceship out to space, then they could definitely send warheads or bombs out into space. So they were all very tense during this time. Up until July 1975, which was called the Apollo-Soyuz test project. It was a joint space venture between the US and Russia, and this was heralded as the end of the space race. Vietnam War, another very important event to consider, was when the US sent 150,000 troops into Vietnam to support the Southern Vietnamese forces against the Northern Vietnamese army. So the Russians were backing the Northern Vietnamese troops by sending them money or materials, giving them advices in their fight against the US and Southern Vietnam. This put the Russian and American relations on ice during this period where they were supporting the Northern Vietnamese forces. In April 30th, 1970, President Richard Nixon ordered U.S. troops to go to Cambodia. This was 5 years after Richard Nixon ordered his troops out to go to Cambodia out of Vietnam. Northern Vietnam invaded Southern Vietnam, and they captured the city of Saigon, and this led to the country becoming a communist country. In 1915, August 15, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords ended American involvement in Vietnam. So we go into the Four Power Agreement in Berlin, which is basically the partitioning of Germany, East, West, and Southern Germany, to 4 different powers, which was the U.S., Great Britain, the Soviet Russia, and France. So they decided, they agreed, and they signed a agreement where they would separate and keep peace with one another. They also signed a strategic arms limitation treaty, which was signed by the U.S. and Russia, so that they may limit their arms against each other. In October 3rd, 1990, the German reunification, so that's when East and West Germany were reunited back into one country. Next. Another event to consider is the Olympic Games boycotting from both the USA and Russia. So this is cause of the Soviet troops invading Afghanistan in December 24th, 1979. So later the next year, in July 1980, a number of countries, including the USA, boycotted the Summer Olympics held in Moscow. Protesting the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan. Other countries protested included Great Britain, and they competed in the games under the Olympic flag rather than their own national flag. In July 1984, Russia and 13 allied countries boycotted the Summer Olympics. So 4 years later, the Summer Olympics in Los Angeles were Russia and 13 other countries boycotted and retaliating from the 1980 boycott of the Moscow Games. And in February 15th, 1989, the last Soviet troops left Afghanistan, so the protests and fighting over. This brings us to the final stages of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War in March 11th, 1985, Gorbachev was the leader of USSR. He wasn't there for very long, 6 years to be exact. In July 1991, they signed the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty between Russia and US. So there were a lot of what we would call interaction between the two countries regarding war, regarding limiting of arms and reducing. On Christmas 1991, Gorbachev resigned, and the next day the USSR breaks apart, and the hammer and sickle flag, which was well known for the USSR and the Soviet Union, on the Kremlin was lowered. So on the 26th of December 1991, Russia dissolved the Soviet Union, and President Bush declares the end of the Cold War. So, thank you.
All right. So my slide is on canvas. So this is a piece of paper, but you'll see the one next time. So we have seen like how it came from how Russia was involved way in the beginning. But my main question is why, and I think the main reason why is because Putin wants to have a portion of the power over the strongest country, one of the strongest countries, which is America, and Putin wants to have some kind of power on it. Yeah. So to understand this concept, I took a step back and looked at Putin's life on its own. Now, Vladimir Putin has this obsession of gaining information from the strongest organization, whether it be its own environment. For example, he was leading the Soviet Union. He was in the Soviet Union when it was established, but when it went down, he decided to focus his attention on the Kremlin, and wanted to take control of it, which he did eventually. Yeah. That was not enough for him. He also made his way into being the president of Russia. Before his presidency, Boris was the president, and now Boris had some really unsettled deeds and really upset some people, and so he was afraid of being persecuted. But what Vladimir Putin saw, his tension, his problem, he saw it as his opportunity. He enticed Boris in a way to tell him that, hey, make me president and I'll make sure you won't get persecuted. What do you think Boris would have done? He should say yes, yeah. So Vladimir Putin stepped in presidency and he's been president ever since. His obsession for power just kept on growing. But he always wanted America from the beginning. But his biggest beef with America was it was a liberal world. He hated that. He hated America being a liberal world, being freedom to choose. His method of the ruling in is dictatorship. He is the boss. Yeah. So why did he help Trump? Why did he help Trump win the elections? It's pretty simple. He wanted to step in and gain some kind of portion or like some kind of power. Yeah, but why Trump? Why not the previous presidents? Why didn't he step in then? Now Donald Trump's goal was to get rid of democracy also. He wanted to like build walls and like get rid of people that aren't Americans. He wanted to make currently he's even now trying to do the birthright law, where if you're born in America and if your parents are not from America, you cannot be a citizen. So his motive is basically want to get rid of that democracy too. And so Putin saw this as an opportunity that if he helps Trump win the election, his goal will align with Donald Trump's goal, and they can both work together and probably bring this to an end. But what I don't know if Donald Trump knows what Putin's intentions are, because I know what Putin's intent. We all do. In fact, according to the information systems of Central Information Systems of America, they clearly pointed out multiple Russian hackers attempting to hack the poll system, and some have successfully attacked the poll system. Now, Donald Trump saw that. He did not say anything about it. He said, "Oh, it's other Russians. Don't worry about it." Now, why do you think Donald Trump did that? Like, why would Donald Trump do such a thing? This explains why Putin's hacker helped Trump win the elections. Putin does not and never invest his time or focus on anything that's not worth focusing on. Russians could have attacked any other thing, like the banks or any other thing, but why just the poll? Because in the long run, they see Donald Trump as an opportunity to step in, a focused opportunity to step in, main goal, ultimate goal, take over the White House. Yeah. And America does not realize it, but the more Trump favors Putin, the more he gets closer to quenching his ultimate thirst. Putin has always wanted some kind of American influence or American power. In my other slides, I'll show you like a graph of the Russian attacks, but I want to just my portion of here to conclude is to basically say that the reason the attempt of Putin helping Trump is to gain power. It's always been his obsession. From the time he was in the Soviet Union, the Kremlin, he's always obsessed with power. And Donald Trump may not realize this, and if he does realize it, he must be a bigger fool than I am right now. But that's my portion of the gig.
Alright, let's switch places, Joseph.
All right. So So our final section is from Election Day 2016 and then to today, 2018, November 8th. This is just some fun facts for everyone in the class. It was Donald and Hillary Clinton. This is the map of the states. If there was a blue state, it voted for Hillary Clinton. If it was a red state, it voted for Donald Trump. I added a blue dot on several red states because that is just to show that those are states that Obama won when he was elected president versus the states that Donald Trump won. So Hillary Clinton lost part of Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and 1 vote in Maine. So it was a pretty significant swing. It's also important to note, though, that in most of these states, the win was within 5% of the vote. So it wasn't necessarily a slam dunk. It was in Ohio and Florida, but in all of these states in this region, it was less than 5% of the vote. And we call that the Electoral College. In the United States, if one person gets 51% of the vote, they have electors, or specifically identified government officials, or even just members of the community that maybe the governor of the state or senators from the state will select. And those votes represent one political representative, and so that's why they're electoral votes. Your popular vote does matter, and a lot of people have pointed out, you can't see on the TV, but you'll see in the presentation, she had 65.8 million votes versus his 62.9 million votes. But it's the Electoral College that matters, and that's what he did. He flipped all these blue states. So, go ahead.
And then, so this is my part. So I'm gonna have a lot more on my slides. This is just really rough draft. But Donald Trump has denied several. We can watch this video just to get more information on it. But in the tweet back in 2013, Donald Trump. Just keep in mind that Donald Trump said that during his Miss Universe pageant in November in Moscow, that he wanted to become best friends with Vladimir Putin. So we can watch this and get a better idea.
Vladimir Putin. And Trump was asked about the Russian president several times during his news conference yesterday in Doral, Florida. And here were 2 separate times, just a few minutes apart, where he commented on Putin.
I never met Putin. I don't know who Putin is. He said one nice thing about me. He said I'm a genius. I said thank you very much to the newspaper, and that was the end of it. I never met Putin. Never spoken to him. I don't know anything about him other than he will respect me.
But less than 3 years ago, I interviewed Donald Trump in Moscow. It was ahead of the Miss Universe contest being held in Russia, and I asked him about any connections that he might have to Putin. Do you have a relationship with Vladimir Putin, a conversational relationship, or anything that you feel you have sway or influence over his government?
I do have a relationship, and I can tell you that he's very interested in what we're doing here today. He's probably very interested.
Well, I think my computer died. So, just going off that video, it basically just states that Donald Trump has had a relationship and has a relationship with Vladimir Putin, and then after that, I will have a slide that goes into the background from how Donald Trump, back through decades, I think it's 3 decades, in the 20th century, that Donald Trump has ties back with the mafia of Russia, but also with Vladimir and some Soviets and part of the mafia to make his business now. And especially, I think it was 2 days ago or 3 days ago, they found information that Donald Trump is creating his business tower in Moscow, Russia. And I'll have a little bit more on why he influenced, or why Russia would want to influence the election of Donald Trump. And that's our presentation.
There you go.
Ta-da.